I think it showed innovation and an appetite for risk, that we were willing to do something that hardly anybody was willing to do.
Okay, Mike, thank you so much for joining us on This Is Purdue. We're so excited to celebrate you, reflect back on all your time. We're really excited for this interview, so thank you.
I'm a little apprehensive, a little nervous. I hope I can do a really good job of capturing the best things that happened those 15 years to Purdue.
Yeah, and we're just excited. We know how passionate you are about Purdue. You're a Boilermaker yourself,
Right.
so. Okay, so you're gonna retire as chairman of Purdue's Board of Trustees come January 1. But let's go back to the beginning because you went to Purdue as a student. What first drew you to Purdue? What attracted you to coming to Purdue?
I would say the primary reason occurred late in April, and I hadn't made a decision about a college, and I was planning on playing football, and that required me to go to a smaller school until a former Purdue football star from Fort Wayne, Roosevelt Barnes, happened to be working out in the gym that I was working out in. It was at Dwenger High School. Because they had an advanced weight room and everything. And so Roosevelt Barnes was a 4-year starter in basketball, and in his 5th year decided to play football and ended up getting drafted by the Lions and played in the NFL for a number of years. So that tells you what kind of talent he was. And one time while we were in the gym together, I was slow, but I was strong, and I weighed more than I do now. He said, I'm going to make a phone call. You need to call the folks at Purdue, the coaching staff, and you need to go there. So I let that be the deciding factor, and off I went. And my football experience was short. It was 2 years. The first year was better than the second year because I was in better shape than a lot of the student athletes who didn't have the same kind of gym as we did. But talent wins, and they were way more talented. So it was the best last minute pivot I've probably ever made for something like that.
It changed the trajectory of your life.
Changed everything.
So tell us about your student experience. You were a proud fraternity member with Theta Chi. You played football 2 years. What are some of your favorite memories from your time as a student?
At the beginning, let's start with what that entry experience was. Because I accepted to go to Purdue late, I didn't have any housing. Does that sound familiar? Okay. That was 1981. So I show up and I have to get an apartment. So I'm in an apartment with my brother and a goofy friend of his, and I slept on the couch. And that was about 2 to 3 weeks, or maybe 4 weeks, and an opening in one of the dorms became available. So I move in to Owen Hall, Northeast 449. And it was an 8-man room. There were 4 rooms, 2 students each, except it was a 10 because the need for rooms exceeded supply, which is kind of where we are now. So they put 2, 3-mans, and I was the 10th. So I wasn't very welcome initially because I crowded out the space. But it turned out to be an incredible experience because I keep in touch with all 9. We were on top of each other for a whole year, and I was a Owen Hall dormer, and it was great. It was provided really the first time ever for such a significant difference in each of the students you met. Background, interests. And then the other thing that stayed with me was how the second semester there was a lot more room in the dorm than the first semester. And a lot of people went bye-bye. And so, sharpen the saw and don't let that happen to you. So it was a great start. And then I guess just the second half of that, was rushing, and a good number of the guys in the dorm room, we all rushed together, and the Theta Chi fraternity is just down the hill, and that whole experience was terrific and lent a lot of other meaningful things to me.
I'm a proud Delta Zeta right next door.
Oh yeah, yeah, the acres.
Yeah. So what about professors, mentors, any of the classes that you took at Purdue? Did any of those have a huge impact on you that you look back on now?
Yeah, a couple of folks come to mind. One was a physics professor named Professor Schluter, and he was German. And I thought, this is perfect. It's like a movie, a German physics professor. And he just had the most simplistic way of describing complex concepts. They're not really concepts in physics. They're like laws, This is how it works. And it was the first time I was so impressed about transferring knowledge in a teacher-student relationship that, and partly because of the numbers were so big. So I remember him very clearly. The second person was the alumni advisor at Theta Chi fraternity, Father Phil Bowers. He was the first person I ever met at Theta Chi, and it was in the summertime. And he was a Maryknoll priest, and he started out his priesthood in the Philippines, in some of the most remote regions of the country. And he was just an incredible advocate for life, for growth, for tolerance, and we became really close friends. So, one academic, one Phil was campus-wide. He used to say Purdue has more Catholics than Notre Dame. And we did. It was 10,000, but Notre Dame's only like 7,500.
Wow. Well, you've been on the board for over 15 years. You've been chairman for around 9 years. How have your student experiences at Purdue impacted, how you have ran the board and just impacted some of the decision making that you've had? Walk us through that a little bit.
It really opened my eyes to making sure the Purdue experience is attainable for all different sorts of students. And you get reminded about the difference every time I ever went up there. There was some reminder about how different the students are and what pathway they've sometimes had to take to make it work, including those who work some students work full time. Some are really shy and can't, and they don't get in a dorm they want or a fraternity they want. And so, and then the financial part of it, that was a very important piece. And so we started increasing scholarship opportunities, and we decided to maybe makes more sense to expand more rapidly than we ever contemplated. And then, of course, the tuition freeze. It was a classic Mitch. Came in his very first meeting and said, in Mitch's way, well, I know this probably won't work, and folks will think it's a bad idea, and it might be a bad idea. I'm not sure we should do it, but boom, 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 here's the reasons why. And so that was an important piece of it, and we thought it would only maybe last a year. And here it is, 13, 14 years later.
That's incredible. So when you graduated, were you always still involved in the Boilermaker community? Like, what brought you back to serve in these roles for Purdue?
I had my first job was in Detroit, so it made it a little bit more difficult, but I found ways to come to campus. was also, Kristen was working, I was working, we were in our first jobs, then we started having some kids. So it made it difficult. But anytime Purdue played at Michigan State or Michigan, we'd find an excuse. And there are a lot of Purdue people in Detroit. I didn't follow too closely about, the important things at Purdue, but mostly what was happening in athletics. And I had a burning fire for something to do there. And I didn't work very hard at trying to, make it work for me until I read this post. I don't even know where it was. Couldn't have been on social media because I wasn't there. But that Morgan Burke, the athletic director at the time, which I'm going to say was probably 1992 or 3 or 4, made a decision to hire an in-house marketing person that would handle all of the marketing for Purdue athletics. And I'm reading this. I'm like, oh, this is perfect for me. I'm going to apply. So I told Kristen, I said, hey, look at this. Can you believe this? This job is hardwired for me.
It's a dream job.
Yeah, I can't believe it. She goes, well, how much are you going to make? I said, who cares? So it was a bad number. But anyway, so I interviewed, and I was told there were 100 people who had applied for the position. And the short list had a one-on-one interview with Morgan. So I made the short list, and it turns out there were only 2 of us. That's what they told me. So I had them come down, and I'm sitting in Morgan's lobby in the same building that's there today. It was new at the time. I go in for my interview, and it went really well. I was pretty certain I nailed it. I was already thinking about, okay, where am I going to live? And as he ushers me out the door, the second candidate was a fraternity brother of mine at the same time.
Oh.
And the search was confidential, and we had no idea. So that was, it was like, kidding me. So he goes into the interview, and he ends up getting the job. And he deserved it. He had a much better profile of experience that was suited for it. He was in sales and working for a medical company. But his name is Bob Bernard. I forgive him for it. But but that, having made it all the way there, I started thinking about, well, maybe I have some influence over whether or not I get involved. And so I just started to stay close. And then we moved to Indianapolis, and then the connectivity kicked in.
So take us back to when you received that call that they wanted you as a trustee on the board. What were you feeling?
I was in Chicago with Kristen, and we were at some mart. We had just bought a house, and we were redoing it. And I got a phone call, and it was Earl Good. And he introduces himself, and he says, my name is Earl Good. He's a Southerner, comes from Southern Indiana. And he was working in the governor's office. And he explained that he wanted to talk to me if I had any interest in being a trustee. And I knew who Earl was, but I didn't know much about him. I knew enough that I needed to pay attention to the call because he was the chief of staff for the governor. And I'm thinking, trustee? I mean, isn't that what when people die, is that what it is? I don't have any experience. I didn't even know what it was. So he said, okay, well, I just wanted to know if you're interested, and maybe we'll get back to you. And then about a month later, we were celebrating Kristen's birthday at Ruth's Chris at Keystone, and I'm getting out of the car, and Earl calls again. And he said, I'd like you to come in for an interview. I said, where? I need you to come down to the State House, and we'd like you to meet the governor. I'm like, okay. So I tell Kristen. So the only trustee I really knew was Bill Osterlin. I go, do I need to wear a suit down there? And he goes, yeah, I recommend you wear a suit. So I went down, and Mitch was having a press conference. He was having a press conference, and the room was full. And there was a lot of hustle. And right when I got there, his executive assistant said, oh, did you get my message? And I thought, that means I'm... He said, no, the governor's going to be delayed. He's got this press conference. I said, I can wait. Mitch came out, grabbed me, says, I'd like you to sit in on this. I'm like, okay. It's the first time I really met him. So we went through the press conference, and I watched him work, and it was remarkable. I won't go into what the press conference was about, but it was a battle between him and the state legislature about the budget. So they clear it all out. We sit down, and he interviews me for about 2 hours.
Wow.
Which for Mitch is, a long time.
Yeah.
I didn't know that at the time, but. So I got up, it was over. I walking out the door, and I was kind of thinking maybe there's somebody else out there, and he looked at me and he says, you're my guy. I'm like, wow. That's how it began.
Fast forward to today.
Yeah.
Wow. So take us back, 15 years ago. What were you thinking when you first came in as a trustee? What were some of your goals, and how did that vision evolve, to today?
Yeah. So once the trigger got pulled, I'm pretty active about thinking about how I can help. And one area that was close to me that Purdue was failing in was on the whole physical facilities department was not well liked by any engineers or contractors in the state. In fact, I had significant numbers of Purdue people say they'd rather work for the physical facilities department in Indiana than Purdue. And I knew it because we had considered doing work up there too, and it needed an overhaul. It was a 50-year overdue overhaul, and so that was the first thing I started on. And I remember one of our very well-known alums, Bob Bowen. You probably have had one with him. He came over and he said, "You're never going to get it fixed." I said, "Okay." So we got at it, made some changes, and now Mike Klein, Jay Wasson, the entire team over there is preferred. We went from deferred to preferred. So that was the primary thing. The second thing was athletics. We were in a very bad spot. Nobody was happy. I wasn't happy. And I knew that we needed to elevate that because it's the front door for many people. And so that became a high priority. Keith Kroc appointed me the first liaison to athletics, and that's what I started focusing on.
Fits your background.
Right.
What were those early days like? Do you remember?
They were with Morgan, and he had he was frustrated, and he had a couple of things that he wanted to get accomplished. One of them was the baseball stadium, the women's softball, and the women's soccer field. I think we had progress on those. There was resistance. I wasn't the only one, but I helped get those out of the way, and we got them all built. And that was the first time people started to realize, ooh, maybe we got something here. The next big thing, which I think was a big deal, was the football complex. Mitch and I went at it for a while. He just didn't want to spend the money. But he knew internally it was important. And, we just kept pounding him and pounding him and pounding him. He had some very good points. I had some very good points. And one point in his office, he grabbed his napkin and he said, "I surrender, let's get this thing done." And so when that building went up, it sent a signal. And, everything's changed. So those were two really big steps for me. And I think, we're partway the pathway to advancing in the board.
Absolutely. So a lot of people probably don't realize the chairman is not your only gig. You are the president and owner of Lenex Steel, which is where we are right now in your office. What has it been like, balancing these two, huge things within your life?
It's an exercise for sure. I spent more time at Purdue than here by a large margin, made possible by the staff we have here. I mean, they really, I mean, it was a challenge to them. And so they answered the challenge. And, you know, I let them run, and nothing but growth occurred. So I didn't have many knobs to turn. Now, it does prevent some very significant decisions from being made that only the president or CEO can make. And that's how I'm going to spend my time starting January 1st. We're going to start addressing those types of topics.
How did this position here and all of the work that you've done with your company influenced how you work and collaborate with people within Purdue and key stakeholders?
The role of Purdue helped me network with my industry folks. And they would communicate with me. They'd call if they had a problem or ideas. Lots of them have ideas, really good ideas. So that was one way. Culturally here, you know, for me, it's all about the people and then the customer. That's something I took to Purdue. I wasn't exclusively that, but I wanted to make sure that was the mentality we had. And I think that existed and got better. But I also probably benefited more from the exchange about what we're doing at Purdue here, because I got to watch a lot more people, and I got to so many different departments, and it's a complicated place. It's a complex place. So I got a lot of exposure that most business people don't have, and that helped. It helped us here.
Absolutely. Purdue is the #1 most recognized university in the country. What moments stand out to you as you reflect back with your time within the board and as chairman?
I think it was confirmation that all that we had allowed us to attain that level. And I think we kept a cover on it too long because of humility. And that is one of the things that I worked on really heavy is promoting as a board strategy is we needed a comprehensive marketing strategy. And it started with Dan Hassler, you know, making a position for him and investing in that, and that's what happened. And so I think the roots for that being the most well-known Purdue University were there, but they were undercover, and all we did was turn the light on, and people noticed.
Yeah. As chair, you've supported the 13-year tuition freeze. We talked about that a little bit. So rare in higher education. How have you seen this impact Purdue students and families? You said previously that's one of the most important things that you've gotten to work on, and it was so important to your heart and everything.
Yeah, walking around, seeing students working and of all economic backgrounds, it hits you there. The number of parents who refer to that as one of the main reasons their children are going to Purdue. It's another key factor. And plus, I think it showed innovation and an appetite for risk. That we were willing to do something that hardly anybody was willing to do. And we took the complexity out of it and made it really simple. We just said, as long as our revenues exceed our expenses, why would we raise tuition? And so we had a surplus. And we said, when the surplus goes away, we'll raise tuition. Well, here we are. It's been 13 years of surplus and 13 years of flat tuition.
The Purdue Moves initiative in 2013 and then the next moves in 2021 transformed the university even further. What can you share as far as the impact of these initiatives and the reputation that it's, extended to Purdue?
I think for the board, Mitch hatched the idea, and it was a signal that we're on the move. We will set some bold initiatives and targets to go with them, and we have the people to do it. And that's how it started, and it's been really fun to watch. An idea get formulated and implemented by people who are talented and fired up. And so that made the 150th an easy decision. And we had an excuse to even go bolder, which was the anniversary. And that helped highlight the university. So, and maybe we got another one coming.
And then more recently, we have the Mitch Daniels School of Business, we have Purdue Computes, One Health. All of these initiatives are emerging. What excites you about these and what it means to the future of Purdue?
Well, the most exciting for me personally was the Daniels School of Business. Our business school in the 60s and 70s were highly regarded, kind of lost our way in the 80s and 90s, didn't really have the identity, maybe because it was too heavily STEM and we didn't talk about the business side of it much. And so Gary Lehman, Mike Klipsch, and I all came out of that program and decided that we wanted to have a look at what could we do differently at the Daniels School. And when Mitch came on board, it was really the leverage we needed. We said, this is a perfect justification. Let's name it after him and totally rebuild the school in a different way with a combination of engineering and business, build a new building so we can handle the growth. So that's a big one. And then the One Health, it's just so practical. Animal, people, and plant health. And to partner with folks in Indianapolis, downtown at the same time, Purdue University, Indianapolis. It's a great fit, and we're going to expand our footprint.
Absolutely. You've also overseen the return of commercial flights. We recently did a podcast about that. And all these different partnerships, Rolls-Royce, et cetera. What do these developments mean to you, having had such a big role in that?
Yeah, the best thing about this is it builds a stronger web, geographic web around campus for people like Saab and Rolls-Royce and to bring their folks, and now SK Hynix. And that web, ideally, is going to build a stronger, more interesting West Lafayette, which brings all sorts of things: entertainment, retail, food and beverage, new residents. And that's what I'm excited to watch, because we don't, our downtown really isn't, the boundaries aren't perfectly suited. And with this expansion, there's going to be more room, and there's going to be more people who are going to be looking for housing in West Lafayette, and I think that's the neatest thing. And when an airline comes, if it's successful, it's just another visual tool that people say, wow, they're on the move. And
I even look back, when I was a student, we never went to downtown Lafayette. I'm trying to think of how long ago I was a student. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But now I love downtown Lafayette, and there's so much more vibrancy and things to do and cute little streets and shops and restaurants. So that's been really fun for me to see when I came back to work for Purdue.
Yeah, there's a lot to like down there. I wish the river were further west and the two could become one.
Yeah.
And then we'd have 80,000 people together, not counting students.
Right. So you've mentioned all three of these words, I think, throughout our conversation: innovation, affordability, workforce development. How do you hope to see Purdue's reputation evolve, as the years continue to go by?
I think people expect us to continue to be innovators. They're looking for routine improvements that nobody else thought of, our peers haven't thought of, and create them to be followers. And we're the leader. And I think that's what Purdue people want. That's what the state legislatures would like. It's what the state deserves. And I have an appetite for that. I just can't stand still and just let it go. So that requires investment, and I'm confident the board will continue to see that as a primary objective for them.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit about how you had to to balance between your full-time job and being chairman. With all the different projects and these complex decisions you had to make, how did you adapt to that? How did you face these challenges and overcome them throughout your time on the board?
Well, most of them made sense, but not all of them were supported. And so my primary approach as board chair was to seek understanding of all 10 and make sure everybody understands what the subject is and why it's important. And then if I did enough to make sure they could communicate together, the outcomes came easier and almost always were the right decision. And that's just kind of the style I deployed. This is what I think we should do. I saved that. It's more like, hey, I'd like to get your opinion on this, and this, and we have a really strong board who's unselfish, not power seeking, and they're just really collaborative. And that was very fortunate for me.
And they're all passionate about Purdue.
Very passionate.
You used a word earlier that I loved, and I was like, that sounds like all of the board members, and I can't remember now. But that go-getter spirit and just fired up. They're fired up to serve Purdue, right?
Fired up and restless, with good intent.
Absolutely. So both former Purdue President Mitch Daniels and President Chang now have sung your praises about how passionate you are about Purdue, all of the service that you've service and commitment that you've shown to Purdue throughout the years. What has it been like to work with these two incredible Boilermaker leaders?
Mm-hmm. First of all, when you're leaving, people say that stuff about you, whether it's true or not. So don't get too excited about that. It's the part I'm going to miss a lot. Mitch's leadership is something to watch. Look at his success, and where he started. So it was a real privilege. It helped that I chaired the search for Mitch in 2012. That helped a lot because we were recruiting him. So there was a lot of conversation between the first request, hey, do you have an interest, and him saying yes. And so I had to work that. And Keith Kroc had to work that. We had a search team that was on a separate path, so those were my very first observations with him, and that set me up pretty well, I think, once the board decided I was going to be the board chair. And then with Mung, it's a whole different kind of a talent. He's one of the most talented persons I've ever met. Just his intellectual skills, his high motor, his compassion, sensitive person, wonderful family, who just took on a big job.
Yeah.
And I like being with him. I like being with his family. I learned something from him, and he learns a lot from me. And because we both have those gaps, and we kind of fill them together. So we're in really, really, really good hands. It's going to be an exceptional run for him. It'll get better every year.
Do you have any other specific stories with students or faculty, alumni, that if you thought back on, you'd really want to share right now?
There's been so many. Some that are comical that occurred. Like when Bob Bowen learned that I was chairing the search, he called me up and he said, I'll be at your office in 5 minutes. I have a list of prospective candidates. His office is like a half a mile. Shows up here. First guy you should get but you never will, Mitch Daniels. So number 2 was some general in the Navy or Army, because you're probably not going to get him either. Then he had 3 or 4. Okay.
He seemed to challenge you a lot.
Yeah, he
throughout the
does.
years.
He's way is. He flies in, flies out. You know, and the other thing I've been struck by since making the announcement is it's really moving. I mean, how many people have come up to me and said, you know, like at the basketball game last week, I'm going up the aisle, and a couple of folks I don't even know stop me, you know, and look me in the eye and say, thank you. And I'm like, for what, you know? So there's just a lot of great stories like that. And hearing about students' interactions with certain faculty, and they say the person, you know, changed my whole life. There's just so many different avenues you can go. Oh, and with alumni, donors. You hear why donors give. You know, it's really moving. And the numbers, they're huge. You know, it opened my eyes. There are a lot of people that have a lot of money and have interests in some really cool causes. And so there's never been an interaction. Almost every trip I'd take up there, there's some sort of interaction that reinforces why it's been worth it.
What type of legacy do you hope to leave?
You know, the board is, I don't worry about it at all. I mean, I want them to be hungry and restless and be number one and be the reason why we're on national news, because of innovative ideas and because we're doing different things. I want parents to call and say what kind of experience, what a great experience their kids have, and can't believe, you know, it exceeded their expectations. I want it to be a more significant part of the state, play a broader role nationwide. You know, I know we're the most recognized public university in the country. That's an important thing to sustain, because it means you're relevant and you have some purchasing power. I don't want to be quiet. We need to compete at a high level at athletics. We need to keep improving our facilities, you know, the master plan. And I'm certain it's going to happen. And if it doesn't, maybe I'll come back.
Famous last words.
Yeah.
What advice would you share with alumni or anyone in the Boilermaker community? How can they stay involved, get involved, and maybe stay involved?
One, I would say stay in touch with trustees if you know them, because it makes a difference. People call and make suggestions, folks you've never heard, or you're on a trip and you meet them, and I start registering. You know, the person has some skills, some background, maybe they'd be a good board member, or maybe we should hire them, or maybe that we can give them a special assignment to do. And there's a lot of that. Obviously, the Alumni Association connectivity helps. Stay engaged, follow, and something good's going to come out of it.
What, I want to get to the personal side of Mike Berghoff. I know you have 3 kids.
Yep.
They all went to Purdue.
Did it?
What does that mean to you to watch them grow up, follow in your footsteps at Purdue, and probably some of the time you were on the board while they were students, I imagine?
What makes you think they had a choice? No, Lauren was the oldest, and I said, you can go to any place you want in reason, as long as you have a compelling reason. She came back, she says, Dad, I've looked far and wide, and I want to go to the University of Colorado in Boulder. I said, what's your compelling reason? She says, they don't have school on Fridays in the winter, so we can all ski. So, I said, you got the colors right, you're going to Purdue. And then she quickly discovered that having a dad who's a board chair had some advantages, so she got pretty comfortable, you know. And then my second daughter followed her sister, and I was on the board, and my son, you know, was kind of the same thing. Everybody had a great experience, so that helped.
What does that mean to you to have this big Boilermaker family now?
Yeah, it's, I love it. Kristen mostly loves it, except when it invades personal life. And a lot of our travel was centered around Purdue travel.
Sure.
Hey kids, Thanksgiving's going to be in Dayton, Ohio this year. Why is that? Well, we first round of the tournament or something. So it'll be new and fresh to do some other things. And I'm excited about, and she is too, I'm excited. I'll be around more. I'll be here more in the office, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, on that note, what is your next giant leap? It can be professionally or personally.
I think on the professional side, I've labeled this next decade, because we've completed 2 decades. The first decade was about survival, second decade was about growth, the third decade, which we started in February, is about transformational change. And that's within the company. And so, I don't need to go into what that means, but it means growth and transformation of systems and our production facilities. And that can't happen without me. So I'm excited about that. Personally, I don't know. I don't know. I'm having it. It's going to be tough. I'm going to miss going up there, coming over the bridge, seeing the tower, going over the Wabash River. That's when I start to, get off the phone and change my gear and the parking spots. So I'm going to miss it. But maybe I'll be a relaxed fan.
You've been at Purdue for so many pivotal moments and a couple leadership changes, but what has this whole experience meant to you, to sum it all up?
I wildly underestimated what it would mean to me. I thought it'd be like, I didn't know what to think it would be like. And until I walked in the door for my first board meeting. And so I also got to thank Bill Osterly, who's deceased. He was on the board at the time, and I never asked him, but it was pretty clear he was the one who recommended me to Mitch. And he was a fraternity brother. He was a better friend with my brother John than he was with me. But, when I walked in, it just, my whole world changed. And it sounds phony or corny, but it fills up a lot. It fills up a lot of your calendar. It fills up a lot of your energy. It's a complicated, complex place, and I really enjoyed that piece of it.
Well, we can't thank you enough for joining us and sharing your stories. Is there anything I missed that you want to share with our listeners?
I hope not. I hope not. No, I would like to thank you, all the listeners, and I know you have a lot of them, for being supportive, being positive, thoughtful, inquisitive, eager to let the spotlight shine on Purdue and be a great example to other universities. And I appreciate that opportunity that I was able to help make that possible, and it'll carry on.
Well, we can't thank you enough again.
Oh,
it's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing me into the famous circles of this podcast, Kate.
Thank you.